I am Christopher Wilson, 32 years old, born into a legacy of brick, steel, and ambition. For 15 years, I poured my soul into our family construction company, believing that blood and business could coexist. Then came that Tuesday morning. My coffee still warm when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "You're out of the family business." "Don't call back," my fingers typed a single-word reply. Understood. I had no idea that within 24 hours, my phone would be lighting up with 55 missed calls. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to choose between family and your own integrity. My earliest memory of Wilson Construction involves me at 7 years old, standing in mud up to my ankles on a residential development site, wearing a hard hat that kept slipping down over my eyes. My father, Thomas Wilson, stood tall beside me, pointing at the skeleton frames of future homes, his voice filled with pride. "One day, Christopher, all of this will be yours." Dad didn't start the company, though. That honor belonged to my grandfather, William Wilson, who began with a single truck and a crew of 3 men in 1962. Through sheer determination and honest work, he built it into a respected regional construction firm. By the time I was born, Wilson Construction employed over 100 people and had projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. My childhood wasn't typical. While other kids spent weekends playing sports or video games, I accompanied Dad to construction sites, listening to him negotiate with suppliers and calm anxious clients. He was stern but loving in his own way. A man of few words, Dad expressed affection through inclusion, teaching me about load-bearing walls and profit margins instead of saying, "I love you." Mom, Diana, provided the warmth our home needed. A former architect who gave up her career to raise me, she understood both the technical and emotional sides of the family business. "Your father builds with his hands," she once told me. "But you, Christopher, you build with your heart and your mind." Through my teenage years, I never questioned that my future lay with Wilson Construction. While classmates debated career paths, I already knew mine was predetermined. Not that I minded. I genuinely loved the business, the smell of fresh lumber, the satisfaction of seeing a building rise from nothing, the camaraderie of the crews. When it came time for college, there was no discussion. Business management with a concentration in construction was the obvious choice. My father paid every penny, considering it an investment in the company's future rather than in my education specifically. "Learn what they teach you," he advised before dropping me off at the dormitory, "but remember that the real education happens on the job site." Those 4 years gave me perspective I couldn't have gained within the family bubble. I learned about innovative construction techniques, sustainable building practices, and modern management styles that conflicted with Dad's old-school approach. I graduated with honors and new ideas, eager to bring them back to Wilson Construction. At 22, diploma in hand, I officially joined the company. Dad insisted I start from the bottom, just as he had with grandfather. I spent a year working alongside our construction crews, pouring concrete, framing walls, and coming home with blistered hands and an aching back. The men respected that I didn't ask for special treatment, though they never let me forget whose son I was. My grandfather, then semi-retired but still chairman of the board, became my greatest ally. While Dad saw only the traditional path forward, grandfather recognized that construction was changing. During our weekly chess games, he would ask about my ideas, nodding thoughtfully as I described eco-friendly materials and computer-aided design. "Your father fears change," he confided one evening, his arthritic fingers moving a rook across the board. "He built on what I created, but he built exactly in my footsteps. You, Christopher, will need to forge your own path within these walls." When grandfather passed away 3 years later, I stood by his hospital bed and promised to honor his legacy while guiding the company into the future. I didn't know then how difficult that promise would be to keep. As I moved up through the ranks, from site manager to project coordinator to division head, Dad's perfectionism intensified. Small mistakes that would be forgiven in others became subjects of lengthy lectures when I made them. "You represent more than yourself," became his mantra. You represent the Wilson name. The early signs of our diverging visions appeared in subtle ways. When I suggested updating our project management software, Dad reluctantly agreed but complained about the cost for months afterward. When I recommended hiring a social media manager to boost our online presence, he dismissed it as frivolous marketing. When I proposed a partnership with a local trade school to establish an apprenticeship program, he questioned whether we needed more inexperienced hands slowing down our projects. Each disagreement ended the same way. Dad would listen, frown, then say, "This is how we've always done it, and it works." The unspoken conclusion being, "So why change it?" Despite these tensions, I never doubted my place in the family or the business. I was the sole heir to Wilson Construction, the third generation to carry forward what my grandfather had built from nothing. The disagreements with Dad, I told myself, were just growing pains as I found my voice within the company. I had no idea how wrong I was, or how quickly everything could fall apart. By my early 30s, I had spent a full decade at Wilson Construction, working my way through various departments and learning every aspect of the business. The company had grown substantially during that time, now employing over 250 people, with annual revenues approaching $50 million. Much of that growth came from traditional expansion. More projects, more crews, more of the same work we had always done. But some of it, the parts I was most proud of, came from innovations I had managed to implement despite my father's resistance. After 3 years of lobbying, I had finally convinced him to establish a dedicated commercial renovation division, which quickly became one of our most profitable sectors. My initiative to upgrade our fleet with more fuel-efficient vehicles had reduced operational costs by 15%. The project management software I insisted on adopting had improved our completion times and client satisfaction ratings. The Riverside development became my crowning achievement and turning point. This was a mixed-use commercial and residential project that the city had put out for bid. Most contractors avoided it due to the complicated environmental restrictions on the riverfront property. But I saw an opportunity where others saw obstacles. I spent weeks researching environmentally responsible construction methods that would satisfy the city's requirements while still allowing for profitable development. My presentation to the board, including my father, featured a comprehensive plan that incorporated green roofing, rainwater harvesting, and locally sourced materials. This is the future of construction, I argued, displaying renderings of the proposed development. We can either lead that future or be left behind by it. To my surprise, my father didn't immediately object. Instead, he simply asked, "Can you deliver this on budget and on schedule?" When I confidently answered yes, he nodded and said, "Then make it happen." The Riverside development became my project from start to finish. I assembled my team, negotiated with subcontractors, and managed every aspect of construction. There were challenges, of course. The green roof installation proved more complicated than anticipated. A rainy spring delayed exterior work. Supply chain issues forced last-minute material substitutions. But we persevered. When the project concluded 3 months later, not only was it on time and within budget, but it also won a regional award for sustainable urban development. The employees who had worked on it looked at me with newfound respect. Even my father offered rare praise at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. "My son has shown us a new direction," he told the gathered crowd, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "The Wilson name will continue to stand for quality, whatever materials we build with." I thought this success would change our dynamic, opening Dad up to more of my ideas for modernizing the company. Instead, it seemed to intensify his resistance, as if my triumph threatened him somehow. It was around this time that I met Jessica, a marketing consultant hired to update our company branding. Smart, creative, and refreshingly direct, she immediately understood the tension between tradition and innovation that defined Wilson Construction. "Your father built something amazing," she observed after sitting through a particularly tense management meeting. "But he's scared of what it might become if he loosens his grip." Our professional relationship quickly evolved into something more personal. Jessica became not just my girlfriend but my sounding board, the person who helped me articulate my vision for the company's future. She understood my frustration but also urged patience. Change happens slowly in family businesses, she reminded me. You're playing the long game here. The long game became considerably more complicated when I proposed establishing a dedicated sustainable construction division. The market research was undeniable. Eco-friendly building practices were no longer just a moral choice, but an economic one. Government incentives, changing consumer preferences, and long-term cost savings all pointed toward sustainability as the industry's future. I spent months preparing my proposal, anticipating every possible objection my father might raise. I compiled case studies of successful sustainable construction companies. I created projections showing potential revenue streams. I even secured tentative interest from several potential clients who were seeking greener alternatives for their building needs. The board meeting where I presented my vision remains etched in my memory. I stood confidently at the head of the conference table, surrounded by board members who had known me since childhood, and outlined what I believed was a clear path forward for Wilson Construction. Sustainable building isn't just a trend, I explained, clicking through my carefully prepared slides. It's the future of our industry. By establishing a dedicated division now, we position ourselves ahead of competitors who will inevitably follow this path years later. I had barely finished when my father cleared his throat. The sound silenced the room more effectively than a shout could have. Christopher has always had big ideas, he said, looking around at the board members rather than at me. Some have worked out. Some haven't. This particular idea represents a significant departure from what Wilson Construction has always been. We're builders, not environmental activists. The dismissal stung, but what hurt more was how the other board members, many of whom had seemed engaged and interested during my presentation, suddenly found reasons to look at their notepads or out the window. I'm not suggesting we abandon our traditional business, I countered, fighting to keep frustration from my voice. Just that we expand into an emerging market. An unproven market, my father corrected. With unproven methods and materials. The Riverside development proved both the methods and the market. One successful project doesn't justify restructuring our entire company. Back and forth we went, the discussion growing increasingly heated until my father finally raised his hand, signaling an end to the debate. The board appreciates your enthusiasm, Christopher. But we're not ready to make this kind of commitment. Perhaps in a few years, once these methods have been more thoroughly tested by others. I left that meeting with my proposal rejected, but my determination intact. If I couldn't convince the board through presentation alone, I would find another way. That evening, I called 3 potential investors who had expressed interest in eco-friendly construction ventures. By midnight, I had scheduled meetings with all of them for the following week. Jessica cautioned restraint when I told her my plan. Are you sure you want to go behind your father's back? There might be another way to bring him around. But I was done waiting. Sometimes it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission, I told her. Once I show him it can work, he'll come around. I had no idea then how wrong I was, or how high the price of my impatience would be. My sustainable construction initiative quickly evolved from an idea into a full-fledged secret project. Weeknights and weekends that should have been spent with Jessica or friends were instead dedicated to developing a comprehensive business plan. I converted my home office into a war room of sorts, with walls covered in market research, competitor analyses, and financial projections. Through Jessica, I met Marcus Fletcher, an environmental engineer with expertise in sustainable building practices. Initially hired as a consultant to review my technical specifications, Marcus soon became both collaborator and confidant. What you're proposing isn't just good business, he told me after reviewing my plans. It's the right thing to do. Construction accounts for almost 40% of carbon emissions. Companies like yours have a responsibility to change that. Marcus introduced me to a network of suppliers specializing in eco-friendly materials, from recycled steel to low VOC paints and adhesives. Together, we visited successful sustainable projects in Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver, documenting best practices and potential pitfalls. Each trip reinforced my conviction that Wilson Construction needed to move in this direction. "Your father will come around once he sees the numbers," Marcus assured me during our drive back from Portland. "This isn't just environmentally responsible, it's profitable." I wasn't as confident. My father sees profit through a very specific lens. If it doesn't look like what he's always done, he doesn't trust it. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Through a former college classmate, I learned that Green Future Corporation, a major developer known for their commitment to environmental responsibility, was planning a new corporate campus in our region. The project would be worth at least $50 million, but they were struggling to find a construction firm with both the capacity for a project of that scale and genuine expertise in sustainable building. This was the perfect opportunity to demonstrate the viability of my vision. I arranged a confidential meeting with their development team, bringing Marcus along for technical credibility. For 4 hours, we discussed their requirements, our capabilities, and shared environmental values. By the end, I had a verbal commitment. If Wilson Construction could establish a credible, sustainable division, Green Future would seriously consider us for their project. With this potential contract as leverage, I felt ready to approach my father again. Rather than requesting a formal board meeting, I scheduled a private dinner at his favorite steakhouse. Over aged whiskey and medium-rare ribeyes, I shared what I had learned through my research trips and revealed the potential Green Future contract. $50 million is significant, my father acknowledged, cutting precisely into his steak. But establishing a new division requires more than one potential client, however large. "I have letters of interest from 14 other companies," I replied, having anticipated this objection. Smaller projects, but together they represent another $30 million in potential contracts within the first 18 months. My father chewed thoughtfully. "You've put considerable work into this." "Unauthorized work, I might add, given that the board already declined your proposal." "The board declined based on incomplete information. I've spent the last 3 months gathering the missing pieces." He sighed, placing his fork down with deliberate care. "Leave the materials with me. I'll review them and reconsider." I left the restaurant cautiously optimistic. The next morning, I delivered a thick binder containing all my research, projections, and letters of interest to my father's office. For the first time in months, I felt like we might find common ground. 2 days later, I stopped by his office unannounced, hoping to discuss his thoughts on my proposal. His assistant mentioned he was at lunch, so I decided to leave a note on his desk. That's when I saw it. My carefully prepared binder, sitting unopened in his trash can. The discovery hit me like a physical blow. I removed the binder, noticing coffee grounds staining its cover. He hadn't even bothered to open it before discarding it. All my work, all my research, all my hopes for moving the company forward, literally thrown away. When my father returned from lunch, I was waiting in his office, the coffee-stained binder on his desk between us. "You didn't even read it," I said quietly as he entered. He glanced at the binder, then at me, his expression unreadable. "I didn't need to. I've been in this business for 40 years, Christopher. I know what works and what doesn't. The industry is changing. We need to change with it. When I'm ready to retire, you can make whatever changes you want. Until then, Wilson Construction will continue operating as it always has." "And when will that be?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "When will you trust me enough to help shape the company I'm supposedly going to inherit?" My father sat down heavily in his leather chair. "This isn't your company yet, Christopher. And with the judgment you're showing, I'm beginning to wonder if it ever should be." Those words should have warned me to back down, to find another approach. Instead, they ignited a determination to prove him wrong. If he wouldn't officially sanction a sustainable division, I would create one anyway, demonstrating its value through results rather than proposals. The next day, I contacted Green Future Corporation and confirmed that I would personally oversee their project, operating a sustainable construction team within Wilson Construction. It wasn't technically a lie, I told myself. I was a company executive with authority to pursue new business. I just hadn't secured formal approval for this particular direction. A week later, I met with Green Future's executive team after hours at a downtown hotel conference room. Marcus accompanied me, providing technical expertise as we worked through preliminary designs and specifications. By 11 that night, we had a handshake agreement. Green Future was prepared to work with my division of Wilson Construction on their new campus. "We're impressed with your vision," their CEO told me as we concluded the meeting. It's rare to find a traditional construction company so committed to sustainable practices. On the drive home, Marcus was ecstatic. "This is it, Christopher. Once your father sees a $50 million contract on the table, he'll have to support the sustainable division." I nodded, but uncertainty gnawed at me. I had crossed a line, committing the company to a direction explicitly rejected by both my father and the board. I told myself it was for the greater good, that sometimes leadership requires bold action. In reality, I was about to learn a painful lesson about the limits of my authority and the consequences of overstepping them. The first hint that something deeper was wrong came during a family dinner. My Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother and the company's chief financial officer, made an odd comment when I mentioned some new tax incentives for green building practices. "Always chasing the next big thing," he said with a dismissive wave. "Some of us prefer to focus on what's worked for decades." It wasn't just the words but the tone that struck me, a mixture of condescension and barely concealed hostility that seemed disproportionate to the casual conversation. My father nodded in agreement, and I noticed a look pass between them, the silent communication of a shared secret. 2 days later, I was working late at the office, finalizing some contract details for an upcoming project. Most employees had gone home, leaving the building quiet enough that voices carried from the conference room down the hall. I recognized my uncle's distinctive laugh, followed by my father's deeper tones. I wouldn't have paid attention, except I heard my name mentioned. Curiosity drew me closer. The door was slightly ajar, allowing fragments of conversation to reach me. "Christopher still thinks," my uncle was saying, "too idealistic for his own good." "He's not ready," my father replied. "Maybe in a few more years." If we let him get too close to the financial side, my uncle's voice dropped too low for me to hear the rest. "Just keep the kid in check," my father responded. "I'll handle the rest." I retreated silently to my office, those words echoing in my mind. Keep the kid in check. I was 32 years old, a senior executive in the company, yet they spoke of me as if I were a child to be managed, a potential problem rather than a successor being groomed. The conversation bothered me enough that I began paying closer attention to the company's financial operations, an area my uncle had always jealously guarded. As a division head, I had access to budgetary information for my projects, but the overall corporate finances remained somewhat opaque to me. I started by reviewing past projects I had managed, comparing allocated budgets with actual expenditures. Most showed the expected patterns, with minor variations easily explained by normal construction contingencies. But 3 larger commercial projects from the previous year contained anomalies. Materials cost significantly higher than market rates, consulting fees for firms I'd never heard of, labor charges for crews that, as far as I knew, hadn't worked on those projects. Each irregularity might have been dismissed individually. Together, they formed a troubling pattern. I enlisted the help of Alicia, an accountant in our finance department who had always been friendly to me. Without revealing my suspicions, I asked her to gather additional records on these projects. Strictly for performance analysis, I assured her. I'm looking for efficiencies we might have missed. Alicia delivered more than I expected. Not just the financial records I had requested, but copies of invoices, purchase orders, and payment authorizations. Among them, I found invoices from a company called R&T Consulting Services for project management assistance on all three suspicious projects. The company name meant nothing to me, but the authorized signature on the payment approvals was unmistakable. My uncle Robert's. Further investigation revealed that R&T Consulting had been incorporated just 3 years earlier. The registered agent was Thomas Reed, my uncle's college roommate and longtime friend. A quick calculation of all payments to R&T over the past 3 years totaled just over $2 million. I sat alone in my apartment that night, spread sheets covering my dining table, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. The evidence suggested my uncle had been systematically embezzling from the company, creating a shell corporation to invoice for services never rendered. And given my father's close oversight of all operations, it seemed impossible he wasn't aware of it. This discovery presented an ethical dilemma that transcended ordinary business disagreements. This wasn't about sustainable building versus traditional construction. This was about the integrity of the company my grandfather had built, the legacy I had promised to protect. For 3 days, I gathered additional evidence, creating a comprehensive documentation of the apparent fraud. I considered going directly to the board, but realized several members were close friends of my uncle. I thought about contacting the authorities, but couldn't bring myself to potentially send my own family members to prison. In the end, I decided to confront my uncle privately first. I invited him to lunch at a quiet restaurant where we could speak without being overheard by colleagues. After brief small talk, I placed a folder on the table between us. "What's this?" he asked, not reaching for it. "Documentation of payments to R&T Consulting," I replied calmly. $2.3 million over 3 years for services that appear to be fictional. His expression didn't change, but I noticed his hand tighten around his water glass. "You've been digging through financial records that aren't your concern. Fraud in our family's company is absolutely my concern." My uncle leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Those payments were authorized by your father for a company owned by your friend Tom Reed." A flash of surprise crossed his face before he regained composure. "The arrangements are more complicated than they appear. There are tax considerations, strategic partnerships. So you won't mind if I discuss these strategic partnerships with Dad?" "Go ahead," he replied with surprising confidence. "But understand this, Christopher. Your father and I have built this company to what it is today. You think you're the heir apparent, but you're just a cog in a machine you don't fully understand. Push this and you'll find yourself on the outside looking in." I left that lunch with more questions than answers. My uncle's threat concerned me less than his assertion that my father had authorized the questionable payments. Was it possible Dad knew about and condoned what looked very much like embezzlement? That evening, I requested a private meeting with my father at his home office, away from the workplace. When I arrived, he was reviewing blueprints at his desk, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, looking every bit the respected builder he had always been to me. I placed my documentation before him. "I need to ask you about these payments to R&T Consulting." He glanced at the papers without touching them. "You've been investigating company finances. I've been trying to understand discrepancies that affect projects I manage." He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Robert handles the financial side. Always has. R&T is owned by Tom Reed, Uncle Robert's friend. I'm aware of who Tom Reed is. So you know the company is essentially a shell corporation. That we've paid them over $2 million for services never rendered." My father stood abruptly. "You don't have the full picture, Christopher. There are arrangements, compensations that you don't understand." "Then help me understand." Because from where I'm standing, it looks like Uncle Robert has been stealing from the company, and you've been letting him." The accusation hung in the air between us. My father's face flushed with anger. "How dare you?" he thundered. "After everything I've built, everything I've sacrificed, you come into my home and accuse me of being complicit in theft. I'm trying to protect our company." "No," he shot back. "You're trying to take over. First with your sustainable building crusade, now by undermining your uncle. You've never had the patience to wait your turn. This isn't about waiting my turn. It's about doing what's right." "What's right?" he laughed bitterly. "You've been going behind my back for months, meeting with clients, making promises the company can't keep. And now you're digging through financial records, acting like some kind of corporate detective." His knowledge of my meetings with Green Future caught me off guard. "How did you? Did you really think I wouldn't find out about your secret project? Your meetings with Green Future. Your promises to create a division the board explicitly rejected." We were shouting now, years of tension, erupting in a volcanic exchange of accusations and counter-accusations. When my father finally ran out of breath, he pointed to the door. "Get out," he said, his voice suddenly quiet but no less intense. "We'll discuss your future with the company tomorrow." I left, my hands shaking as I drove home. For the first time, I realized that the rift between my father and me might be too wide to bridge. What I didn't realize was that, by the next morning, the decision would already be made for me. The morning sun streamed through my kitchen window as I prepared breakfast, the normalcy of the ritual at odds with the turmoil of the previous evening. I scrambled eggs with mechanical precision, my mind replaying the confrontation with my father, searching for things I could have said differently, approaches that might have yielded a better outcome. My phone buzzed on the counter, displaying my father's number. I hesitated, not ready for another heated exchange, then decided to let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the notification appeared. Whatever he had to say, he had chosen to record rather than speak to me directly. I tapped the voicemail icon, holding the phone to my ear as I continued stirring the eggs with my free hand. "Christopher," my father's voice sounded tired, drained of the previous night's anger, replaced by a cold finality that made my stomach clench. "After discussing the situation with Robert and key board members, we've reached a decision. You're out of the family business. Don't call back. Your access cards have been deactivated, and security has been instructed not to allow you on the premises. HR will send the necessary paperwork regarding your severance." The message ended there. No explanation beyond my confrontation of their financial irregularities. No acknowledgement of my 15 years with the company. No recognition of my blood relation. Just a corporate dismissal, cold and impersonal. I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear long after the message ended, eggs beginning to burn in the neglected pan. Finally, I moved mechanically to turn off the stove, no longer hungry, feeling a strange numbness spreading through me. My first impulse was to call back, to demand answers, to remind him that this wasn't just any employee he was firing but his son. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and typed a single-word response. "Understood." That text represented not acceptance, but acknowledgement. I understood exactly what had happened. I had threatened the system my father and uncle had created, one that apparently included financial arrangements outside normal business practices. Rather than address the ethical issues I'd raised, they had eliminated the perceived threat. Maya. The numbness gave way to a hollow ache as the reality sank in. I had lost not only my job but my identity. Since childhood, I had been the heir to Wilson Construction. Now I was. What exactly? I spent that morning in a daze, cleaning my apartment with an intensity that kept my hands busy while my mind processed the seismic shift in my life. By noon, I had organized my closet, scrubbed the bathroom to a shine, and rearranged my bookshelves twice. At 1 o'clock, Jessica called. "Are you okay?" I've been trying to reach you all morning. I've been fired, I said, the words sounding strange as I spoke them aloud for the first time. Dad left a voicemail. I'm out of the family business. What? Why? What happened? I explained the confrontation, the financial discoveries, the cold dismissal. Jessica listened without interruption, then asked the practical question I hadn't yet considered. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. Wilson Construction has been my whole life. No, she corrected firmly. It's been your whole career. There's a difference. After promising to come over that evening, Jessica ended the call, leaving me with her distinction echoing in my thoughts. Career versus life. The company versus my identity. Perhaps they weren't as inseparable as I had always believed. I needed movement, space to think. I grabbed my car keys and began driving with no particular destination in mind. The familiar cityscape gave way to suburban developments, many of which Wilson Construction had built, then to open countryside. 2 hours later, I found myself at the ocean, parking near a deserted stretch of beach. The rhythmic crash of waves provided a soothing backdrop as I walked along the shore, considering options I had never before had reason to contemplate. I could fight the dismissal legally, though that would mean publicly exposing the apparent financial misconduct, potentially destroying the company and sending family members to prison. I could capitulate, accept the severance, and seek employment with a competitor. Or I could forge an entirely new path. By sunset, no clear answer had emerged, but the paralyzing shock had begun to recede. I drove back to the city as darkness fell, arriving home to find Jessica waiting in her car outside my apartment building. She embraced me without words as I approached, holding on longer than usual, communicating support through presence rather than platitudes. You should fight this, she said once we were inside, sitting across from each other at my dining table, the same surface where I had pieced together evidence of my uncle's apparent fraud. They can't just push you out because you uncovered something they wanted to hide. I'm not sure fighting is the right move, I replied, surprising myself with the realization as I spoke it. Not in the way you mean. They stole from the company. They fired you for finding out. How is that not worth fighting? I considered this, trying to articulate the thoughts that had formed during my beach walk. Fighting them directly means destroying what's left of our family relationship. It might mean destroying the company itself. The company they just kicked you out of, Jessica reminded me. The company my grandfather built. The company that employs 250 people who had nothing to do with my father's decisions. Jessica studied me, a small smile forming. So what does fighting look like, if not legal action? Success, I said simply. Building something of my own. Showing them what they lost when they pushed me out. She reached across the table to take my hand. Now that sounds like a fight worth having. Later that evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Marcus Fletcher, the environmental engineer who had been helping with my sustainable construction initiative. I heard what happened, he said after I answered. Word travels fast in this industry. I'm sure it does. The construction community in our region was relatively small, with news and gossip flowing freely among competitors, suppliers, and clients. I wanted you to know, Marcus continued, that my offer still stands. What offer? To partner on sustainable projects. My firm has the technical expertise, but we lack your construction management experience. Together, we could create something significant. The suggestion planted a seed, one that would grow rapidly in the fertile soil of my newfound freedom. Before ending the call, I arranged to meet with Marcus the following week to discuss possibilities. That night, as I tried to sleep, my phone began vibrating with notifications. Colleagues, subcontractors, and even a few clients had heard about my sudden departure and were reaching out, some offering sympathy, others seeking explanation. I silenced the device, not ready to craft a public narrative about what had happened. In the darkness of my bedroom, I realized that my identity had never truly been dependent on Wilson Construction, despite what I had always believed. My knowledge, my relationships, my vision for the future, all remained intact despite my father's attempt to cut me off completely. The company name might not be mine to inherit, but the skills and connections I had built over 15 years couldn't be taken away by a voicemail. For the first time since hearing my father's cold voice announcing my dismissal, I felt something like peace. Not happiness, certainly, but a quiet determination that whatever came next would be built on my terms, according to my values. I drifted off to sleep with nascent plans forming in my mind, unaware that events were already in motion that would bring my father and uncle to my doorstep sooner than I could have imagined. The persistent buzz of my phone dragged me from deep sleep. Squinting at the bright screen, I was stunned to see 55 missed calls accumulated overnight. 20 from my father, 15 from my uncle, and the rest from various Wilson Construction board members, executives, and project managers. No voicemails, just call after call beginning around 5 that morning. It was now just past 9. Something significant had clearly happened. As I sat up trying to process this development, a text from Jessica appeared. "Have you seen the news? Call me ASAP." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Daniel Harrington, a senior project manager at Wilson Construction, and someone I considered a friend as well as a colleague. "Daniel, what's going on?" I answered without preamble. "My phone is blowing up." "Where have you been?" he demanded, sounding simultaneously stressed and excited. "Everyone's been trying to reach you since dawn." "Sleeping." "Now tell me what's happening." Green Future signed the contract last night. $50 million with a non-negotiable clause that Christopher Wilson must lead the project. They're saying they signed with you, not the company. Your father is having a meltdown. The information took a moment to process. Green Future signed with Wilson Construction. Yes, but specifically with you as project lead. When your father tried to explain that you were no longer with the company, their CEO threatened to pull out entirely. Said their agreement was predicated on your sustainable construction expertise. While this explained the barrage of calls from my father and uncle, it didn't account for the timing. Why would they sign last night specifically? Daniel's voice lowered slightly. That's the other thing. Someone sent Green Future documentation suggesting financial irregularities at Wilson Construction. They accelerated their decision process and included the clause requiring your involvement as protection against potential instability in company leadership. The anonymous whistleblower wasn't hard to identify. Alicia from accounting had access to the same records I had found, plus likely more. She must have connected the dots between my questions about specific projects and my sudden dismissal. There's more, Daniel continued. Your Uncle Robert was caught trying to delete financial records this morning. It already had a backup, so nothing was lost, but it created a massive scene. Security escorted him from the building about an hour ago. I sank back against my headboard, trying to absorb these rapid developments. And my father has been trying to reach me since when? First call went out around 5:15 from what I heard. Board members started getting calls by 6. There's an emergency meeting at 11. After thanking Daniel for the information and promising to stay in touch, I ended the call, only for the phone to immediately buzz again with my father's number. This time I let it ring through to voicemail. No message appeared. Apparently, he had nothing to say that could be recorded. Over the next hour, as I showered and dressed, the calls continued intermittently. I responded to Jessica's text, arranging to meet for lunch, but otherwise maintained my silence. Whatever crisis was unfolding at Wilson Construction, I needed time to consider my position carefully. By mid-morning, the calls had expanded to include several key clients besides Green Future. My assistant from Wilson Construction, Lauren, texted to inform me that multiple project teams were threatening to quit if I wasn't brought back. They're saying you were the only one who understood both the technical and human sides of project management, she wrote. The sustainable crews are particularly vocal. Around 11, when the emergency board meeting would be starting, I received a call from Marcus Fletcher. Have you been following the implosion at Wilson? He asked without greeting. I've been hearing pieces, I acknowledged. It's chaos over there. Your discovery about R&T Consulting opened a Pandora's box. Apparently, there were other shell companies, other financial arrangements that bypassed normal accounting procedures. Nothing that necessarily rises to criminal levels, from what I'm hearing, but definitely ethically questionable and potentially damaging if clients get wind of the details. How do you know all this? I have contacts on 3 different Wilson project teams. Everyone's talking. The board is in panic mode, trying to contain both the internal revolt and the client concerns. After ending the call with Marcus, I decided it was time to take more proactive steps. Clearly, events were moving rapidly, and I needed professional guidance before responding to any of the calls still lighting up my phone. I contacted Sandra Patel, a business attorney I had worked with on several Wilson construction contracts over the years. She agreed to see me immediately at her downtown office. You're in an unusually strong position, Sandra observed after I explained the situation. Green Future's contract clause makes you essentially irreplaceable in the short term. The employee loyalty you've earned provides additional leverage. And while you haven't directly threatened to expose the financial irregularities, that possibility clearly concerns the board. I don't want to destroy the company, I emphasized. There are hundreds of employees who would be hurt if Wilson Construction collapsed under a financial scandal. Then what do you want? It was the same question Jessica had asked, but now, with the events of the morning providing new context, I had a clearer answer. I want independence. The freedom to build according to my values and vision. And I want accountability for what my father and uncle did, but in a way that doesn't destroy what my grandfather built. Sandra nodded thoughtfully. I think we can craft an approach that accomplishes those goals. Let me outline some options. For the next hour, we discussed possible negotiations, legal protections, and strategic responses to the crisis unfolding at Wilson Construction. By the time I left her office, I had a clear plan and the beginning of formal documentation to support it. As I stepped out of the building, my phone rang yet again with my father's number. This time I answered. Christopher, his voice carried none of the coldness from yesterday's voicemail. Instead, he sounded tired, perhaps even contrite. We need to talk. Yes, I agreed calmly. We do. The board room at Wilson Construction, 3 o'clock. I'll bring my attorney. A pause then. This is a family matter. You made it a business matter when you fired me by voicemail. Another pause, longer this time. 3 o'clock. We'll be there. As I ended the call, an email arrived from Sandra with draft documents outlining our discussion. I forwarded them to my father with a brief message. For review before our meeting. The few hours before the scheduled confrontation gave me time to meet Jessica for lunch and update her on the morning's developments. Are you nervous? She asked as we sat at our favorite cafe. Oddly, no, I realized. For the first time in years, I feel clear about what I want and what I'm willing to accept. It's actually liberating. Whatever happens, Jessica said, reaching across the table to take my hand, you've already won the most important battle. You chose integrity over easy compromise. That matters more than any business outcome. Her words stayed with me as I drove to the Wilson Construction headquarters, the building that had been my second home for 15 years. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed several employees watching from windows, undoubtedly aware of the drama unfolding and curious about its resolution. I straightened my tie, took a deep breath, and walked toward the entrance, ready to face my father and uncle not as a disowned heir, but as a man standing firmly on principle and prepared to chart his own course regardless of the outcome of the coming meeting. The security guard, who had been instructed yesterday not to allow me entry now, held the door open with a respectful nod. Word had clearly spread throughout the company about the dramatic reversal in my circumstances. The elevator ride to the executive floor gave me a moment to center myself, to remember that regardless of the outcome, I had already decided on my path forward. This meeting would determine the nature of my relationship with Wilson Construction going forward, but not the direction of my own future. When the doors opened, I found Lauren waiting, a warm smile breaking the professional demeanor she typically maintained at work. "They're all in there," she said, gesturing toward the boardroom. "Your father's your uncle, every board member. And they don't look happy." "Good," I replied, surprising myself with the genuine sentiment behind the word. Their discomfort indicated the strength of my position. Sandra Patel was waiting in the small conference room adjacent to the boardroom, reviewing documents one final time. "Are you ready?" she asked as I entered. I nodded. "More than ready." Together, we walked into the boardroom. The conversation that had been buzzing immediately silenced. 8 pairs of eyes turned to watch our entrance, but I focused only on 2. My father at the head of the table and my uncle beside him, both looking significantly more haggard than they had just 2 days earlier. I took the empty chair directly opposite my father, Sandra sitting beside me. The symbolism of our positions, facing each other across the length of the table, was not lost on anyone present. "Christopher," my father began, his tone carefully modulated. "Thank you for coming. We have a situation that requires immediate resolution." "We have several situations," I corrected calmly. "The Green Future contract, the employee retention crisis, and the financial irregularities that prompted my dismissal. I suggest we address them in that order." My father glanced at the other board members before responding. "We're prepared to offer you reinstatement as Executive Vice President, with full authority over the Green Future Project and our new Sustainable Construction Division. Your salary would be increased by 30%, with additional performance bonuses tied to the division's profitability." It was, by any objective measure, an excellent offer, far more than I had expected, which made me immediately suspicious. "And the financial issues I discovered." My uncle shifted uncomfortably but remained silent. My father cleared his throat. "Internal review has confirmed some accounting discrepancies. They've been addressed. R&T Consulting has been removed as a vendor, and all questionable transactions have been reversed in our books." "That easily," I pressed. $2 million of fraudulent payments just wiped clean with no consequences. My father's jaw tightened. "The board has implemented new financial oversight procedures to prevent similar issues in the future. But no accountability for what's already happened." One of the other board members, Janet Wilson, no relation despite the shared surname, leaned forward. "Christopher, we understand your concerns. But a public examination of these issues would damage the company irreparably. Clients would flee, contracts would be canceled, employees would lose jobs. Surely that's not what you want." "No," I agreed. "It's not." Relief visibly swept through the room. "However," I continued, "accountability doesn't necessarily require public disclosure." Sandra opened her briefcase and distributed copies of the documents we had prepared. "We've outlined an alternative approach that protects the company while ensuring appropriate consequences for the improper financial activities." My proposal was straightforward but impactful. I would not return to Wilson Construction as an employee. Instead, I would establish my own independent sustainable construction company. Wilson Construction would partner with my new firm on the Green Future Project, with profits split according to a formula detailed in the agreement. Robert would resign from Wilson Construction immediately, with his ownership shares purchased by the company at a 20% discount from market value to partially compensate for the financial damage his actions had caused. Most critically, my father would create a succession plan with a definite timeline for his retirement as CEO, transitioning leadership to a qualified executive chosen by a committee that included independent board members and me as a consultant. As the board members reviewed the documents, my father stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, something between anger and a reluctant respect. "You're not coming back," he said finally, a statement rather than a question. "No," I confirmed. "I'm moving forward." The partnership arrangement allows Wilson Construction to fulfill its contract obligations while giving me the independence to build something aligned with my own values. "This company is your birthright," he argued, though with less conviction than I would have expected. "Your grandfather built it for future generations." "He built it to construct buildings with integrity," I countered. "That legacy continues in different forms." The discussion that followed was intense but surprisingly productive. Board members raised concerns, suggested modifications, and ultimately recognized the practicality of my proposal given the current crisis. My uncle said little, seeming to understand that his position was untenable regardless of the outcome. 3 hours later, we had a framework agreement. My new company, Horizon Sustainable Construction, would partner with Wilson Construction on the Green Future project and potentially on future ventures where our capabilities complemented each other. Robert would resign effective immediately. My father would work with the board to develop a formal succession plan with a 3-year timeline. As the meeting concluded and board members filed out, my father asked me to stay behind. When we were alone, he sank heavily into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. "Was any of this necessary?" he asked, gesturing vaguely at the signed documents on the table between us. "Couldn't you have just come to me with your concerns about the finances?" "I did," I reminded him. "You threw my report in the trash and told me this wasn't my company yet." He winced slightly at the reminder. "I was wrong about that. About several things." It wasn't quite an apology, but from my father, it was as close as I was likely to get. I nodded, accepting the concession without demanding more. "Grandfather would be proud of you," he said after a moment's silence. "Standing on principle, even when it cost you something important." "He'd be proud of this resolution too," I replied. "The company continues, but with better controls and clearer direction." We parted with a handshake, formal but not cold. The relationship would need time to heal, if it ever fully could. But the professional arrangement we had crafted would give us structured opportunities to rebuild trust gradually through shared projects and mutual interests. In the 6 months that followed, Horizon Sustainable Construction grew from a concept into a thriving reality. I leased office space, hired key talent, and established relationships with suppliers and subcontractors, many of whom had worked with me at Wilson Construction and were eager to be part of my new venture. The Green Future project broke ground with joint teams from Horizon and Wilson working in unprecedented collaboration. Our sustainable construction methods attracted attention throughout the industry, leading to feature articles in trade publications and inquiries from potential clients across the region. Most surprisingly, my company won the Regional Innovation in Construction award just 5 months after incorporation, recognition that typically went to established firms with years of project history. The citation specifically mentioned our groundbreaking approach to integrating environmental responsibility with traditional construction excellence. My father attended the award ceremony, sitting somewhat awkwardly at our company table, but making an effort to engage with my team members. When my name was called, I saw what might have been pride briefly cross his face before his usual reserve reasserted itself. The healing between us progressed slowly but steadily. Sunday family dinners resumed, initially tense affairs with careful conversation, gradually becoming more natural as weeks passed. During one such dinner, nearly 7 months after the confrontation that had changed everything, my father unexpectedly raised his glass in a toast. "To Christopher," he said, his voice gruff but sincere, "who had the courage to stand for his convictions and the wisdom to find a path forward that served everyone's interests. Your grandfather would indeed be proud." "As am I." The words meant more than I could express in that moment. I simply nodded my acknowledgement, understanding that this represented a significant shift in our relationship, an acknowledgement of me as an equal rather than a subordinate. Today, 1 year since that fateful voicemail, I find myself in a position I could never have anticipated. Horizon Sustainable Construction employs 47 people and has contracts valued at over $70 million. Wilson Construction, under new financial leadership and with my father actively implementing the succession plan, has emerged stronger from its near crisis. Most importantly, I've established a mentoring program for young construction professionals, emphasizing both technical excellence and ethical leadership. The program specifically targets those from family businesses, helping them navigate the complex dynamics of legacy, innovation, and personal identity. Through this work, I've realized that my experience, painful as it was, provided lessons that can benefit others. That sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to what you truly need. That standing for principles may cost you in the short term, but rewards you immeasurably in the long run. And that true legacy isn't about names on buildings or company letterhead, but about the values you demonstrate when tested. When my phone rang that morning a year ago, I never imagined that a voice telling me I was out would eventually lead me to discover where I truly belonged. The journey wasn't one I would have chosen, but it led to a destination far better than the one I had originally envisioned. So what about you? Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own integrity? Did standing your ground cost you something important, but ultimately led to something better? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might be struggling with similar challenges. Sometimes knowing others have walked the same difficult path can provide the courage needed to take that first step toward authentic success. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most meaningful beginnings.